Tonight we begin with a financial decision that European leaders had debated, delayed, and finally delivered. A commitment that unfolded not over years of bureaucratic negotiation, but in a matter of weeks. Weeks that changed the trajectory of Ukraine's survival. Weeks that sent a message to Moscow. Weeks that rewrote the rules of wartime finance. What the European Union did today crossed a line that Russia had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Kremlin did not remain silent. They responded with anger, condemnation, and threats. But Europe, for once, did not flinch. $105 billion. That's the number now being committed to Ukraine's defense and reconstruction. And the most remarkable part? Not a single ruble of frozen Russian assets will be touched. At least, not directly. For months now, there had been signals not from official government statements, not from formal diplomatic channels, just signals that Europe was preparing something unprecedented. The European Union has been supportive of Ukraine, yes, but they have been cautious in their support. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Moscow this week was that the pattern went silent. Analysts who monitor European financial policy know the indicators. The quiet meetings between finance ministers, the sudden scheduling of emergency summits, the unusual coordination between Berlin, Paris, and Brussels, the sudden disappearance of public disagreements, all of that went quiet. And whenever Europe goes quiet, it means something significant is about to be announced. For weeks, the debate had centered on a seemingly impossible question. How do you fund a war without seizing the enemy's assets? The answer, as it turns out, was hiding in plain sight. You don't touch the principal. You leverage the interest, and you create a loan so massive, so consequential, that it fundamentally changes the calculus of the conflict. Early this morning, EU officials detected what they described as a breakthrough in negotiations, including commitments from member states that had not been secured in over 3 years of war. These are the kinds of financial pledges that Europe only makes when they are signaling something very specific. Long-term commitment, strategic realignment, or preparation for escalation. Observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Europe was changing its posture. And when a continental bloc shifts posture without warning, even by small measure, Moscow pays attention. The European Commission announced that member states had agreed to a consolidated loan package worth approximately $105 billion. This loan would be extended to Ukraine over the next several years. It would fund military procurement, infrastructure reconstruction, and economic stabilization. But here's where it gets interesting. The loan would be backed not by European taxpayers directly, but by the interest generated from frozen Russian central bank assets held in European institutions. Approximately $300 billion in Russian sovereign wealth remains frozen across Western financial systems. That money generates billions in annual interest. And that interest, Europe decided, would service the debt. The statement issued by the European Commission tonight was not normal. But financial strategy only works if the adversary hesitates. Russia did not. In fact, their response today was among the most aggressive we've seen in months. Here's what we know. Within hours of the announcement, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a formal protest. These weren't the standard diplomatic complaints. These were threats of retaliation, warnings that Moscow would consider any use of frozen assets, even interest, as an act of economic warfare. Russian officials warned that Western assets in Russia could face reciprocal measures. They threatened to seize European corporate holdings. They threatened to blacklist European banks. And they threatened to pursue legal action in international courts. But Europe, understanding the stakes fully, did not back down. Not this time. Tonight, the European Commission confirmed that the loan package would be distributed across multiple tranches, including immediate disbursements that had already been approved for what officials believe was urgent military procurement. Europe moved before Russia could mount a diplomatic counteroffensive. They secured commitments from Germany. They secured commitments from France. They secured commitments from smaller nations that were likely preparing to object on legal grounds. In other words, Europe targeted the weak points in their own coalition. The hesitation that would have made opposition possible, this is what made the announcement so significant. Europe's decision wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could sustain Ukraine's war effort for years if implemented correctly. And the European Commission, understanding that fully, responded with unity. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't announce the loan without securing funding mechanisms. They didn't promise money without establishing repayment structures. They hit the legal barriers first. They hit the political objections second. And now the money is beginning to flow. And here's where the story becomes even more consequential. Intelligence analysts now believe that Europe's latest move was designed to test the resilience of the Western alliance after months of uncertainty about American commitment. Europe wanted to see whether they could lead without Washington. And today, they proved they could. The United States didn't object. In fact, American officials issued statements of support that were so swift, so coordinated, that even Moscow noticed. You don't get Russia's attention easily. But today, Europe did. Financial experts speaking with international media under anonymity described Europe's shift as strategic autonomy, a way to insulate Ukraine from potential changes in American policy. But Europe proved today that they remain both committed and capable. Their announcements were not only comprehensive, they were structured so precisely that legal challenges will be difficult to mount. That structure matters because it shows institutional maturity. It shows that Europe is not merely reacting to the crisis. They are shaping it. The $105 billion isn't just a number. It's a signal to Ukraine that help is coming, a signal to Russia that isolation will deepen, and a signal to the world that Europe can act decisively when the stakes are high enough. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Europe's commitment. Germany committed to backstopping the largest portion, forcing smaller nations to match proportionally. France targeted diplomatic holdouts that had been hesitant in the last several months. The European Central Bank, operating in coordination with national banks, reportedly structured the loan mechanisms in ways that minimize risk to European financial stability. This wasn't just a loan. This wasn't just aid. This was strategic investment. This was economic warfare by other means. And economic warfare is the one thing Russia has struggled to counter since sanctions began. For every military advance they have made, Europe has countered with something that undermines their financial stability. Remember, Russia thought Europe would fracture under energy pressure. They thought European unity would collapse when gas prices spiked. They thought the political cost of supporting Ukraine would eventually outweigh the moral imperative. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Europe is more united than at any point since the war began. European financial commitments have reached historic levels, and European political will shows no signs of weakening. The Kremlin strategy of waiting out Western support appears to be failing. Not because Europe suddenly became generous, but because Europe finally became strategic. They found a way to fund the war without creating the legal and political complications of direct asset seizure. They found a way to use Russia's own money against them without technically touching it. And they did it in a way that could survive changes in government across the continent. What makes this moment so critical and so consequential is that Europe's latest move happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under mounting pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic reformers want negotiations. Regional governors want resources diverted from the war. Oligarchs want sanctions relief. Putin is balancing these demands while managing a war that has lasted far longer than anyone in the Kremlin anticipated. And when leaders in that position see their adversaries unifying, they're not operating from strength. They're operating from anxiety. They're operating from the fear that time may not be on their side after all. The European Commission's statement, now distributed to all member governments, was designed to signal that Europe is not willing to allow Ukraine to fall due to financial exhaustion. Officials said plainly that Russia's continued aggression was inconsistent with any pathway to normalized relations. That is diplomatic language for, this war will be funded until it ends on terms acceptable to Ukraine. You don't usually hear that tone from Brussels unless something serious is at stake. And tonight, something serious is the fate of the European security order, the credibility of Western deterrence, and the future of a nation of 40 million people. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed his nation in a grateful, determined speech tonight. He said, Europe has shown that solidarity is not just a word. He said, this support gives us the strength to continue defending our land. And he said, together we will ensure that aggression does not pay. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become. Zelenskyy knows that this money doesn't just buy weapons. It buys time. And in this war, time is everything. Here's what makes the situation even more complex. Europe's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the loan announcement, the United Kingdom also committed additional bilateral support. Canada increased military aid shipments. Japan increased humanitarian and reconstruction funding targeting Ukrainian infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Western allies move multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Coordination at this level doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. And the design appears to be a comprehensive effort to ensure Ukraine can sustain its defense regardless of what happens in Washington. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Europe is preparing for a potential shift in American policy after the next presidential election. Another is that Europe is attempting to accelerate Ukraine's path to EU membership by demonstrating financial integration. A third possibility, the one concerning officials the most, is that Europe is attempting to create conditions for a negotiated settlement by strengthening Ukraine's position. But today, Russia's hope that Ukraine would collapse economically was taken off the table. Europe didn't hesitate. Europe didn't fragment. Europe didn't wait for American leadership. They led. What we're watching now is a test of endurance. Russia wants to see if Western unity can survive another year of war. Ukraine wants to show that with adequate support, victory is possible. The European Union wants to prevent the collapse of a sovereign nation on its borders. And the United States wants to prevent a broader conflict that could draw in NATO directly. Everyone is watching. Everyone is calculating. And everyone understands that the decisions made in the coming months will shape Europe for decades. Tonight, we've heard from officials who are now monitoring the implementation of the loan package. They say disbursements could begin as early as next month. They say the legal framework has been structured to withstand challenges. And they say Russia's decision to threaten retaliation is likely part of a broader strategy intended to divide European opinion. But Europe is not backing down. In fact, Europe is doubling down. Their response today, comprehensive, coordinated, and historic, sent a message to Russia that isolation will only deepen. And it sent a message to Ukraine that they are not alone. As the weeks go on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly this loan package will fund. But what we do know is that Europe's decision was timely. It stabilized Ukrainian confidence at a critical moment. It demonstrated Western unity when Russia expected fracture. And it created a financial framework that could sustain Ukraine's defense for years. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the next several months. If they escalate, this moment will be remembered as the point when Europe finally committed fully. If they negotiate, European leaders have already shown they are prepared to support Ukraine from a position of strength. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in years, Russia appears to be uncertain. The Kremlin is quiet. Too quiet. And when Moscow is quiet, it means they are calculating. It means they are choosing their next move carefully, because tonight Russia learned something they should have understood from the beginning. Europe will not abandon Ukraine. Western unity is stronger than predicted. And $105 billion speaks louder than any threat. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Europe has chosen its side. Ukraine has gained precious time, and Russia's strategy of waiting out the West has suffered a significant blow. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.